What happens when a seasoned television journalist decides? She's had enough of carefully crafted PR responses and politely calls out what millions of viewers are thinking. The tension in Studio 1A was thick enough to cut with a knife as Savannah Guthrie sat across from Meghan Markle. Her usual warm demeanor replaced by something far more pointed. This wasn't going to be another softball interview, and everyone in that room could feel it. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that had social media buzzing for weeks, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting me know what you think about celebrity interviews that go completely off the rails. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because what unfolds is absolutely unprecedented. The interview started innocuously enough. Meghan had come on the show to promote her latest venture, a lifestyle brand that promised to empower women through mindful living. She was perfectly put together as always, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile practiced and media-ready. "Meghan, thank you for joining us this morning," Savannah began, her tone professional, but noticeably cooler than her usual bubbly greeting. "You're here to talk about your new brand, but I think our viewers are curious about something else entirely." Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that seasoned television watchers would recognize as the first crack in the armor. "Of course, Savannah. I'm always happy to connect with your audience." "Well, let's address the elephant in the room, then," Savannah continued, leaning forward slightly. "You've built quite a narrative around being silenced, around not having a voice. Yet, here you are on your fourth major network interview this month. Help me understand how someone who claims to be voiceless manages to secure more airtime than most sitting politicians." The studio fell silent. Camera operators exchanged glances. This was not the gentle human interest piece that had been scheduled. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately, her posture straightening as she prepared to deflect. "I think there's a difference between having access to platforms and actually having your truth heard, Savannah. When you're constantly fighting against a narrative that's been constructed about you, sometimes you have to speak louder to be heard above the noise." But Savannah wasn't backing down. She had clearly done her homework, and her next question landed like a precision strike. "Your truth. That's interesting phrasing. Because I've been looking at the timeline of events you've described in various interviews, and there seem to be some significant inconsistencies. For instance, 3 months ago, you told another network that you felt completely unprepared for royal life, that no one helped you understand the protocols. But we have footage from your engagement interview where you specifically mentioned the comprehensive briefings you received." Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The cameras caught everything, zooming in on her face as she processed this unexpected challenge. This wasn't supposed to happen. Media appearances were supposed to be controlled environments where she could shape her narrative without pushback. "I think context matters, Savannah. What I meant was that while there were briefings about protocol, there wasn't emotional support for what I was experiencing personally. The institutional aspects and the human aspects are completely different things." "Are they, though?" Savannah pressed. "Because you've made some pretty serious allegations about racism within the institution. These aren't just personal grievances. These are accusations that have damaged relationships and reputations. Don't you think the public deserves specifics rather than vague implications?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's media-friendly facade was beginning to crack under the sustained pressure of actual journalism. She shifted in her chair. Tell that body language experts would dissect frame by frame in the hours following the broadcast. "I've been very clear about my experiences. Savannah, I'm not going to relitigate every detail of what was an incredibly painful time in my life just to satisfy people's curiosity." "But that's exactly what you've been doing, isn't it?" Savannah's voice remained calm, professional, but there was steel underneath. "You've made a career out of relitigating these experiences. The interview that broke the internet, the Netflix series, the book deals, the podcast. At what point does sharing your pain become exploiting your pain?" Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like anger, though she tried to mask it with a look of hurt, bewilderment. "I find it interesting that when women, especially women of color, speak about their experiences, they're accused of exploitation. Would you ask a male CEO who wrote about overcoming adversity the same question?" Savannah didn't miss a beat. "Actually, yes, I would and I have. But we're not talking about overcoming adversity in business. We're talking about making allegations that you refuse to substantiate while simultaneously profiting from the controversy those allegations create. That's not empowerment, that's manipulation." The word hung in the air like a slap. Meghan's composure finally cracked completely, her carefully constructed masks slipping to reveal something much less sympathetic underneath. "I'm sorry, manipulation? Are you seriously suggesting that sharing my truth about experiencing racism is somehow manipulative? I'm suggesting that making serious accusations without providing evidence while building a media empire around those accusations raises legitimate questions about motivation," Savannah replied evenly. "Questions that any responsible journalist should ask." Meghan looked around the studio as if seeking rescue, but the crew remained professionally focused on their jobs. There would be no cavalry coming to save this interview. She was on her own, facing the kind of sustained questioning she had managed to avoid for years. "This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away from public life in the first place," she said, her voice taking on a tone that had worked in previous interviews. A mixture of wounded dignity and noble suffering. But Savannah wasn't buying it. "Actually, you didn't retreat from public life. You strategically repositioned yourself to control your own narrative while maintaining all the benefits of celebrity without the accountability that comes with institutional responsibility. There's a difference." The accusation was surgical in its precision. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to realize that anything she said would only dig her deeper into the hole that was opening beneath her. The silence stretched uncomfortably as viewers across America watched a masterclass in journalism unfold in real time. The silence was deafening, but Meghan wasn't someone who stayed down for long. Years of media training and natural instinct kicked in as she decided to go on the offensive rather than continue playing defense. "You know what, Savannah? I came here thinking we were going to have a respectful conversation about my work, about empowering women, and building something positive. Instead, you're attacking me with talking points that sound like they came straight from a tabloid editorial meeting." Savannah's eyebrows raised slightly, but her expression remained controlled. "I'm asking questions based on your own public statements. If those questions feel like attacks, perhaps the issue isn't with the questions. The issue," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly, "is that you're perpetuating exactly the kind of hostile environment that made my life unbearable. You're sitting here questioning my integrity, questioning my motivations, questioning my right to tell my own story. This is gaslighting, plain and simple." The accusation of gaslighting was clearly intended to shut down the line of questioning, a rhetorical stop sign that had worked effectively in other interviews. But Savannah had covered politics, natural disasters, and international conflicts. She wasn't intimidated by media buzzwords. "Gaslighting is making someone question their own reality by denying facts," Savannah responded calmly. "I'm not denying your experiences. I'm asking you to be specific about them. There's a difference between questioning someone's story and questioning their right to tell it. You absolutely have the right to share your experiences. But when those experiences become public accusations that affect other people, the public has a right to examine them critically." Meghan's media smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by something much more authentic and far less appealing. "So now you're the arbiter of what constitutes a legitimate experience. This is exactly what I mean about the system protecting itself. You're more concerned about protecting an institution than listening to someone who is harmed by it." "I'm concerned about accuracy," Savannah shot back, her professional demeanor never wavering. "You've made claims about conversations that allegedly took place, but when pressed for details, you deflect. You've implied institutional racism, but when asked for specifics, you hide behind privacy concerns. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't make public accusations and then claim privacy when asked to substantiate them." Meghan leaned back in her chair, clearly frustrated by her inability to control the direction of the conversation. In previous interviews, sympathetic hosts had allowed her to steer discussions back to safer territory whenever she felt cornered. This was uncharted waters. "What you're doing right now is victim blaming," she said, pulling out another phrase from her media defense playbook. "You're asking me to prove that I was mistreated instead of examining why someone would put themselves through this level of scrutiny unless they had no choice." Savannah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the point before delivering her next question with devastating precision. "That's actually an interesting point. Let's examine it. You say you had no choice but to speak out, but you had already stepped back from royal duties. You had moved to California. You had your freedom. Your choice wasn't between silence and speaking out. Your choice was between privacy and profit. And you chose profit." The words landed like physical blows. Meghan's carefully maintained composure cracked further as she realized that her usual tactics weren't working. Every deflection was being redirected back to the core issues she was trying to avoid. "That's not fair," she said. And for the first time in the interview, she sounded genuinely hurt rather than performatively wounded. "We needed to support ourselves. We were cut off financially. We had security concerns. We had to find a way to sustain our family." "I understand that," Savannah replied, her tone softening slightly, but her resolve remaining firm. "But you weren't cut off because you spoke your truth. You were cut off because you chose to leave. And then you monetized the story of why you left. That's a business decision, not a brave stand for justice." Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. The mask was completely off now, and viewers were seeing something they had never witnessed before. The real person behind the carefully crafted public persona. A business decision. Are you kidding me right now? We're talking about my mental health, about thoughts of self-harm, about my child's safety, and you're reducing it to business decisions. Savannah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not reducing your pain to anything, Meghan. Mental health struggles are real and serious. But using those struggles as unquestionable shields against legitimate questions about your public statements is problematic. Millions of people struggle with mental health without building media empires around their trauma. So now I'm not allowed to heal publicly? I'm not allowed to use my platform to help others who might be going through similar experiences. Of course you are. But healing publicly and weaponizing your pain for public sympathy while avoiding accountability are different things. You've created a narrative where any criticism of your actions or statements is automatically an attack on your trauma. That's not healthy, and it's not honest." Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back slightly. For a moment, it looked like she might walk off the set entirely. The cameras tracked her movement as she took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain some semblance of control. "I think we're done here," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. But Savannah wasn't finished. "Are we? Because I have one more question, and I think it's important." Meghan remained standing, her body language screaming that she wanted to leave. But something in Savannah's tone made her pause. "You've spent years talking about the importance of truth, of authentic storytelling, of giving voice to the voiceless. But what about the voices you've silenced? The staff members who signed non-disclosure agreements. The family members who can't respond to your public allegations. The friends who've been cut off for refusing to participate in your narrative. Where's their truth in all of this?" The question hit its target with surgical precision. Meghan's face went through a series of micro-expressions, anger, surprise, calculation, before settling on something that looked almost like defeat. "That's not how this works," she said quietly, sinking back into her chair. "When you're the one with less power, when you're the one who's been marginalized, you don't owe your oppressors a platform. But you're not powerless now, are you?" Savannah pressed. "You have Netflix deals, book contracts, speaking engagements worth millions. You have a platform that reaches hundreds of millions of people. At what point does the narrative of powerlessness become a choice rather than a reality?" Meghan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes, a kind of raw honesty that hadn't been there before. "You really want to know the truth, Savannah? The truth is that I thought I could do it better. I thought I could take all that privilege, all that platform, and actually make a difference. But the system is designed to break you down, to make you choose between conformity and destruction. So I chose a third option. I chose to leave and tell my story on my terms." For the first time in the interview, Savannah looked genuinely interested rather than skeptical. "And how's that working out for you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, Meghan seemed to consider giving an honest answer. But years of media training and self-preservation kicked in, and the vulnerable moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. "It's working out exactly as it should," she said, her defensive walls rebuilding in real time. "I'm living authentically, raising my children away from toxic environments, and using my voice to advocate for important causes." Savannah studied her carefully, recognizing the retreat back into talking points. "But are you, though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've traded one kind of performance for another. Instead of royal protocols, you have media narratives. Instead of palace handlers, you have PR teams. You've gone from being managed by one institution to being managed by another. That's completely different." Meghan snapped, her composure slipping again. "Now I have agency. Now I get to choose. Do you, though?" Savannah's voice was almost gentle, but the question was surgical. Because it seems like you're trapped in this story now. Every interview, every project, every public appearance has to somehow reference your royal experience. You can't move forward because you're financially and professionally dependent on looking backward. Meghan's face flushed with anger. But underneath it, there was something else. Something that looked suspiciously like recognition. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? When was the last time you had a conversation in a major interview that wasn't about your time in the royal family? When was the last time you were asked about your ideas, your creativity, your vision for the future without it being filtered through the lens of your past grievances? The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses in the interview. This wasn't Meghan calculating her response or trying to deflect. This was the silence of someone confronting a truth they had been avoiding. I'm building something new, she said finally. But her voice lacked conviction. Are you? Because your lifestyle brand, your podcast, your media projects, they all seem to orbit around the same central theme. You as victim, you as survivor, you as truth teller. That's not building something new, Meghan. That's building a monument to your grievances. Meghan's hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. You have no idea what it's like to have your entire life dissected by strangers, to have every word twisted, every action questioned. You're right. I don't, Savannah agreed. But I do know what it's like to be a journalist, and I know the difference between accountability and persecution. What I'm doing right now, asking you direct questions about your public statements, this isn't persecution. This is journalism. This is ambush journalism. Meghan shot back, her media training finally abandoning her completely. This isn't what we agreed to. I came here to talk about empowerment, about positive change, and you've turned this into a character assassination. Savannah leaned back slightly, her expression remaining calm despite the escalating tension. I asked you about inconsistencies in your public statements. If that feels like character assassination, perhaps the problem isn't with the questions. The problem, Meghan said, standing up again, this time with clear intent to leave, is that you've already decided what you think about me, and nothing I say is going to change that. This isn't journalism. It's performance. Sit down, Meghan. The command was quiet but firm, and something in Savannah's tone made Meghan pause mid-step. Because if you walk out of here right now, you prove everything your critics have ever said about you. That you can dish it out, but you can't take it. That you can make accusations, but you can't handle questions. That you're exactly the kind of person who demands accountability from everyone except yourself. Meghan froze, caught between her desire to escape and her recognition that walking out would be a public relations disaster. Slowly, reluctantly, she sank back into her chair. Fine, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. What else do you want to know? I want to know why you think you're entitled to sympathy without scrutiny, Savannah said, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal genuine frustration. You've made millions of dollars telling the world how badly you were treated. But you've never once acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, some of the criticism you received was legitimate. Maybe some of the protocols you found restrictive actually serve important purposes. Maybe some of the people you've painted as villains were actually trying to help you succeed. Because they weren't, Meghan replied immediately. Everything I've said about my experience is true. I'm not questioning the truth of your experience, Savannah said with obvious patience. I'm questioning your interpretation of it. There's a difference between something being true and something being the whole truth. Meghan's jaw worked silently for a moment before she found her voice. So, what's your point, Savannah? What's the endgame here? You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to tear me down, trying to discredit everything I've worked for. What do you want me to say? I want you to say something honest, Savannah replied simply. Not media-trained, not focus-grouped, not designed to generate sympathy or outrage, just honest. The request seemed to catch Meghan off guard. She stared at Savannah for a long moment, and viewers could almost see the internal struggle playing out across her face. You want honesty? She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Fine, the honest truth is that I thought I could have it all. I thought I could keep the platform and the prestige without the responsibility and the scrutiny. I thought I could be a royal when it suited me and a private citizen when it didn't. And when that didn't work out, I convinced myself that it was everyone else's fault. The admission hung in the air like a confession, and for a moment, the studio was completely silent. Then Meghan seemed to realize what she had said, and her expression hardened again. But that doesn't mean the racism wasn't real. That doesn't mean the lack of support wasn't real. That doesn't mean the harm to my mental health wasn't real. No, it doesn't, Savannah agreed. But it does mean that your response to those real problems created new problems. And until you acknowledge that, until you take responsibility for your part in this ongoing drama, you're going to be trapped in this cycle forever. Meghan looked directly into the camera for the first time during the interview, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a kind of defeated defiance. Maybe that's a cycle I'm willing to be trapped in if it means maintaining my integrity. Savannah's response was immediate and devastating. But that's exactly the problem, Meghan. You've confused stubbornness with integrity, grievance with justice, and victimhood with virtue. And until you understand the difference, you're never going to find the peace you claim to be seeking. The final silence stretched impossibly long with Meghan staring at Savannah as if seeing her clearly for the first time. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, the studio microphones barely picked it up. I think we really are done here. As Meghan stood to leave, removing her microphone with shaking hands, Savannah delivered one final observation that would be replayed countless times in the hours and days that followed. The tragedy isn't that you were treated unfairly, Meghan. The tragedy is that you had a chance to rise above it, to show grace under pressure, to demonstrate the kind of character that would have made your critics irrelevant. Instead, you chose to become exactly what they said you were. Meghan paused at the edge of the set, her back to the cameras, her shoulders rigid with tension. For a moment, it seemed like she might turn around, might have the last word, but instead she walked away, leaving Savannah alone at the interview desk. As the cameras continued to roll, as we watched this unprecedented confrontation unfold, it became clear that this wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a masterclass in what happens when careful media management meets actual journalism. Savannah Guthrie had done something that few interviewers had managed to do. She had stripped away the layers of narrative and spin to reveal something much more complex and human underneath. What did you think of this explosive interview? Was Savannah too harsh? Or was this exactly the kind of accountability journalism we need more of? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that break the internet and reveal the truth behind the headlines.